The CEO couldn't believe his eyes when he read the mysterious letter from a 7-year-old street girl. "Can you read this letter? This will change your life." But what she wrote was impossible. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Harrison Sterling's world was about to crumble, and he didn't even know it yet. The 32-year-old CEO sat in his marble and glass office overlooking Central Park, sorting through mail with the cold efficiency that had made him Manhattan's most feared businessman. 25 years had passed since he'd allowed himself to feel anything real, anything that mattered beyond profit margins and stock prices. "More begging letters," he said to himself, his voice echoing in the empty office. Each envelope represented someone else's misery, someone else's desperate plea for help. Harrison had learned long ago that caring was a luxury he couldn't afford. Then his fingers found something different. A small envelope addressed in wobbly purple crayon. The paper was wrinkled, stained with what looked like tears. His name was spelled out in a child's careful handwriting, Mr. Harrison Sterling. Something deep inside his chest, a place he'd thought was dead, stirred uncomfortably. He should throw it away. He should stick to his rule of never reading personal mail. But instead, Harrison found himself tearing open the envelope with shaking hands. The letter inside was written on notebook paper, decorated with faded unicorn stickers. As his eyes moved across the childish scrawl, the color drained from his face. "Dear Mr. Sterling, can you read this letter? This will change your life forever. My name is Emma Rose Thompson, and I'm 7 years old. Me and my grandma Betty live on the streets now because mean people took our house when Mommy and Daddy died in a car crash 6 months ago. But Mr. Sterling, I have to tell you something scary. I know things about you that I shouldn't know. I dream about you sometimes, and in my dreams I see a little girl with blonde pigtails who looks just like me. Her name was Sarah, and she was your sister. She died when she was 7, just like I am now. I know you were supposed to watch her that day, but you wanted to play baseball with the older boys instead. I know she chased you to the park and got hit by the red truck while you weren't looking. I know you still blame yourself, and I know you keep her pink teddy bear hidden in your office safe, right next to your daddy's gold watch. Mr. Sterling, God talks to me in my dreams. He says you're not mean like everyone thinks. He says your heart is just broken like mine. He says if you don't help me and Grandma Betty soon, something terrible will happen, and you'll never forgive yourself again. Please meet me tonight at 8 o'clock at the old brick church on Elm Street, the one with the crooked cross on top. I'll be waiting by the big oak tree. I believe you're good inside, Mr. Sterling. Please don't let me down. Love, Emma Rose P.S. Sarah says hi. The letter slipped from Harrison's trembling fingers and floated to the floor like a fallen leaf. His chest felt crushed, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. Tears, the first he'd shed since Sarah's funeral 25 years ago, began streaming down his cheeks. How could this impossible child know about Sarah, about the teddy bear, about that awful day that had turned him into the heartless monster he'd become? Outside his window, storm clouds gathered like harbingers of change, and Harrison Sterling realized that his carefully constructed world was about to be torn apart by the words of a 7-year-old girl who somehow held the key to his darkest secret. Harrison Sterling stared at the letter for 3 hours and 47 minutes, reading and rereading Emma's impossible words until they burned themselves into his memory like a brand on his soul. His secretary knocked twice, her voice muffled through the heavy oak door, but he didn't answer. His phone rang 17 times, merger calls, board meetings, million-dollar deals, but the corporate world felt as distant as a half-remembered dream. The afternoon sun slanted through his floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his marble desk, where the letter lay like a small bomb that had already detonated his carefully ordered world. Every word Emma had written seemed to pulse with impossible truth, each sentence another crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. At 6:30, as Manhattan's lights began to twinkle below like earthbound stars, Harrison opened his office safe with trembling fingers. The electronic lock beeped softly, and there, exactly where Emma had said it would be, sat Sarah's pink teddy bear next to his father's gold watch. The bear's fur had faded from bright pink to a dusty rose, and one of its button eyes hung by a thread, but it still smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo Sarah had loved so much. How could she know? He whispered to the empty office, his voice cracking like a teenage boy's. The sound echoed in the vast space, bouncing off walls lined with awards and photographs of himself, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. How could any 7-year-old possibly know these things? He picked up the bear with reverent hands, remembering the day Sarah had named it Mr. Buttons because of those silly glass eyes. She'd carried it everywhere, to kindergarten, to the grocery store, to bed every single night. The day she died, it had been clutched in her tiny arms when the paramedics arrived. Harrison pressed the bear to his chest and felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to crack after a long, brutal winter. The tears came slowly at first, then in great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. 25 years of buried grief poured out of him, filling his pristine office with the sound of a grown man finally mourning his baby sister. But deep down, beneath the grief and guilt and crushing weight of memory, Harrison knew he was going to that church. Not because he believed in miracles or divine intervention. Those luxuries had died with Sarah 25 years ago. He was going because something in Emma's letter, something in her impossible knowledge and gentle words, had reached past all his defenses and touched the broken little boy he'd buried beneath layers of success and cynicism. At 7:45, Harrison Sterling, the man who owned half of Manhattan's skyline, walked out of his building wearing jeans and a simple grey sweater, carrying Sarah's teddy bear in a brown paper bag. His doorman's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and his driver looked confused when Harrison waved away the waiting limousine and started walking toward Elm Street on foot. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under the streetlights. Steam rose from the wet pavement, and the air smelled of rain and possibility. With each step away from his tower of glass and steel, Harrison felt pieces of his carefully constructed armor falling away like scales from an old wound, finally ready to heal. He was no longer the ruthless CEO who'd built an empire on other people's failures, who'd forgotten how to see people as anything more than profit margins and strategic assets. He was just a man haunted by 25 years of guilt, walking toward a meeting with a little girl who somehow held the key to his darkest secrets and perhaps his redemption. Emma Rose Thompson looked exactly like Sarah, and Harrison's world tilted on its axis the moment he saw her. She was sitting beneath the massive oak tree beside the old brick church, her blonde hair catching the amber glow from the street lamp above like spun gold. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds soaking wet, wearing a white dress that had once been pristine, but was now grey with dirt and wear. Her small feet were bare despite the cool evening air, covered in colourful band-aids that spoke of a childhood spent navigating harsh concrete instead of soft playgrounds. But it was her eyes that stopped Harrison cold, the same brilliant blue as Sarah's, holding wisdom and sadness no 7-year-old should possess. When she looked up at him, Harrison felt as though she could see straight through to his soul, past all the walls and barriers he'd spent decades constructing. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, standing up with the careful grace of someone much older, someone who'd learned to move through the world with caution. "You came. I wasn't completely sure you would, but I hoped. I prayed really hard that you would." Harrison's throat felt like sandpaper, his mouth dry as desert dust. Up close, the resemblance to Sarah was even more striking. The same small, heart-shaped face, the same way of tilting her head when she spoke, the same unconscious habit of tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How do you know about Sarah?" he managed to whisper, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of traffic. "About the things in my safe, about that day, about everything that happened." Emma tilted her head, studying his face with that unsettling intensity, as if she were reading words written across his forehead that only she could see. "Sometimes God shows me things in my dreams, pictures of people's hearts, their hurts, their secrets. Yours has been broken for a very, very long time, Mr. Sterling, all dark and twisted up with guilt that doesn't belong to you." "That's impossible," Harrison whispered, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew he was lying to himself. Standing here in the gathering dusk, looking down at this impossible child who radiated otherworldly knowledge, everything he'd believed about the world was crumbling like a house built on sand. "You brought her teddy bear," Emma said, pointing to the paper bag in his shaking hands. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, transforming her from a solemn little oracle into the 7-year-old she should have been allowed to be. "Mr. Buttons, Sarah's so happy about that. She says she misses you terribly, and she's been trying to tell you something important for years and years, but you wouldn't listen because your heart was closed up tight like a fist." Harrison's legs nearly gave out. He reached for the church's stone wall to steady himself, his vision blurring with unshed tears. "Stop. Please, just stop talking about her like she's still here." But Emma stepped closer, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm with infinite gentleness. The moment her tiny fingers made contact with his skin, Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in 25 years. Peace. Pure, inexplicable, overwhelming peace that washed through him like warm honey, soothing places in his soul he'd forgotten existed. "She doesn't blame you, Mr. Sterling," Emma said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. "She never did, not even for 1 second. She says the accident wasn't your fault, and she's been trying to tell you that for years, sending you signs and dreams and little whispers. But you wouldn't listen because the guilt was screaming too loud in your head." Tears streamed down Harrison's face as 25 years of crushing, suffocating guilt began to crack and crumble like a dam giving way to a flood. "I should have been watching her. I was supposed to take care of her, and I chose baseball over my baby sister. I let her follow me to that park, and I wasn't paying attention when she—" "You were 12 years old," Emma interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Just a little boy who wanted to play with his friends, who didn't know that terrible things could happen in the blink of an eye. Sarah knows that. God knows that. The only person in the whole wide world who doesn't forgive you is you." "Grandma Betty's inside the church," Emma said, taking Harrison's large hand in her tiny one with the complete trust of a child who had never learned to fear strangers. "She's been waiting to meet you, too. She has important things to tell you, things about our family and why I can see the things I see." Harrison allowed the small girl to lead him through the church's heavy wooden doors, their hinges creaking with the weight of decades. Inside, the old building was dimly lit by flickering votive candles that cast dancing shadows on walls lined with faded stained-glass windows. The air smelled of old wood, melted wax, and the lingering traces of countless prayers whispered in desperate hope. The pews were mostly empty, except for a small figure huddled in the front row, wrapped in a thin shawl that had seen better days. As they approached, Harrison could hear the soft sound of labored breathing punctuated by harsh, wet coughs that made his chest tighten with sympathy. "Mrs. Thompson?" Harrison approached carefully, unsure of the protocol for meeting someone whose granddaughter claimed to receive divine messages in her dreams. Betty Thompson looked up with eyes the same brilliant blue as Emma's, though hers were rimmed with red and shadowed with exhaustion. She was probably only in her early 60s, but hardship had carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth, aging her far beyond her years. When she smiled, though, her entire face transformed, radiating a warmth and strength that spoke of a soul that had been tested by fire and emerged unbroken. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but steady, carrying the quiet dignity of someone who'd survived unimaginable loss without losing her faith. "I've been praying you'd come, asking the good Lord to soften your heart and open your eyes to what Emma really is." "Emma told me about your situation," Harrison began awkwardly, his business training failing him completely in this sacred space filled with flickering candles and inexplicable peace. "About losing your house, about the illness, about Emma's gift," Betty interrupted gently, glancing at her granddaughter, who was now moving around the altar with the familiarity of someone who'd spent countless hours in this holy place. Emma lit candles with reverent care, her small hands steady and sure as she tended to each flame like a tiny priestess serving at an ancient shrine. "I need you to understand something very important, Mr. Sterling," Betty continued, patting the worn wooden pew beside her in invitation. "Emma's been having these dreams since she was barely 3 years old, seeing things that haven't happened yet, knowing things about people that no child should know. At first, I thought it was just an overactive imagination, the way children sometimes have imaginary friends or tell elaborate stories." Harrison sat down heavily beside her, his expensive clothes seeming absurdly out of place in this humble sanctuary. "When did you realize it was something more?" Betty's smile was tinged with sadness and wonder. "When she told me about the nice lady in the grocery store whose husband was going to leave her 3 days before it happened. When she knew that old Mr. Peterson down the street was going to have a heart attack and insisted we check on him. We found him just in time to call the ambulance. When she started crying for no reason one morning and said her mama and papa were going to heaven that very day." "The car accident," Harrison whispered. "Emma screamed and fought against going to school that morning. She begged me to keep her parents home, said she'd seen them with angels in her dreams. I thought she was just being fussy." Betty's voice broke slightly. "If I had listened, if I had just trusted what she was trying to tell me." Emma appeared beside them like a small ghost, her blue eyes wise and sad. "It wouldn't have mattered, Grandma Betty. Sometimes God shows us things so we can help people, and sometimes He shows us things so we can be ready. Mama and Papa needed to go to heaven to help other people there. Their job on earth was finished." Harrison stared at this impossible child who spoke of death and divine purpose with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone far beyond her years. Harrison Sterling had solved countless corporate crises, navigated hostile takeovers, and built a business empire from nothing but ambition and ruthless determination. But nothing in his privileged, insulated world had prepared him for the humbling complexity of trying to help a homeless grandmother and her mystical 7-year-old granddaughter. "I want to get you both into the plaza tonight," he said, pacing the narrow space behind the church pews like a caged tiger, his mind racing through logistics and solutions. "The presidential suite, room service, whatever you need. Tomorrow, we'll find you a proper apartment, something with a view of the park, a good school district for Emma, private health care for Mrs. Thompson. I know the best doctors in the city, specialists who—" "That's very kind of you, Mr. Sterling," Betty interrupted gently, her weathered hands folded in her lap with quiet dignity. "But we can't accept charity like that." Harrison stopped mid-pace, his expensive shoes squeaking against the worn wooden floor. "Excuse me? We don't take handouts," Emma piped up from where she was carefully organizing donated canned goods in a corner, sorting them by type with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that order meant survival. Grandma Betty says handouts make people feel small inside, like they're not worth anything except what someone else gives them. Oh, but you're living in a church, Harrison protested, his business-trained mind struggling to process this incomprehensible rejection of his simple, elegant solution. Money had always been the answer to every problem in his world. Need a better location? Buy the building. Want faster results? Pay double. Facing opposition? Make an offer they can't refuse. Mrs. Thompson, you're clearly ill, he continued, his voice rising with frustration. Emma needs proper nutrition, educational opportunities, medical care, stability. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me solve this for you. Betty studied his face with that same unsettling intensity as her granddaughter, as if she were reading his soul like an open book. Mr. Sterling, has anyone ever told you that sometimes the person offering help needs it more than the person receiving it? What's that supposed to mean? Harrison demanded, his carefully controlled composure beginning to crack around the edges. Emma appeared beside him with that ghostly quiet way she moved, looking up at him with those impossibly knowing blue eyes. It means you think money fixes everything because you've never learned how to fix anything with your heart, Mr. Sterling. You want to throw dollars at our problems so you can feel better about yourself and then go back to your empty office and pretend none of this ever happened. The words hit Harrison like physical blows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. That's not, I'm genuinely trying to help you people. No, Betty said softly, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who'd seen through countless facades and pretenses. You're trying to write a check and make us disappear so you don't have to feel uncomfortable anymore. So you don't have to look at what real poverty and real suffering look like up close. Harrison opened his mouth to argue, then closed it as the truth of her words sank in like stones, dropping into still water. Because somewhere deep down, beneath all his good intentions and generous offers, he realized they were absolutely right. So, what do you want from me? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma took his hand again, and again that inexplicable peace washed over him like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. We want you to learn how to be human again, Mr. Sterling. Money won't teach you that. It just builds bigger walls between you and real life. But helping people with your hands and your heart, getting your clothes dirty and your feelings involved, that's what makes people real. Harrison Sterling, master of the universe, stared down at a 7-year-old girl who had just offered him the one thing his billions couldn't buy, the chance to remember what it felt like to be genuinely, messily, beautifully human. 3 days later, Harrison found himself doing something he hadn't done since he was 12 years old, manual labor that served no profit motive whatsoever. He was kneeling on the church's wooden floor, helping Betty organize the food pantry that served the neighborhood's homeless population, his $1,000 suit replaced with donated jeans and a work shirt that had seen better decades. His manicured hands were now dirty and scratched from stacking canned goods, sorting donated clothes, and repairing broken shelves with tools that felt foreign in his soft palms. The work was harder than any board meeting he'd ever endured, more exhausting than any corporate crisis he'd navigated. But it was also strangely satisfying in a way that closing million-dollar deals had never been. Each organized shelf, each repaired piece of furniture, each small improvement to this humble sanctuary felt like it mattered in a way his stock portfolios never had. Emma flitted around the church like a tiny supervisor, directing their efforts with the confident authority of someone far older than her 7 years. She seemed to know exactly where everything belonged, which families needed what supplies, and how to make the limited donations stretch to help as many people as possible. Mr. Sterling, she said during their lunch break, settling beside him on the church steps with the easy familiarity of an old friend. I had another dream about you last night. A really important one. Harrison's chest tightened with familiar anxiety. Over the past 3 days, Emma's dreams had proven themselves unnervingly accurate in ways that defied all logic and reason. She'd known about his childhood dog Rex, about the scar on his knee from falling off his bicycle when he was 8, about his mother's maiden name and his father's favorite song. Each revelation had chipped away another piece of his rational, ordered worldview. "What did you see this time?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Emma's blue eyes grew distant and serious, as if she were looking at something only she could see floating in the air between them. "I saw you as a little boy, crying in your bedroom after Sarah died. I saw your mommy and daddy fighting all the time in the kitchen, throwing dishes and saying terrible things, because they were so sad and scared and didn't know how to help each other. I saw you listening from the top of the stairs, deciding right then and there that you would never love anyone again because it hurt too much when they went away." Harrison's breath caught in his throat like a physical obstruction. She was describing memories he'd buried so deep in his subconscious that he'd almost convinced himself they were nightmares rather than reality. The endless nights of muffled arguments, his parents' marriage crumbling under the weight of their grief, his own desperate vow to never again care about anyone enough to be destroyed by their loss. "But Mr. Sterling," Emma continued, her small hand finding his with that magical ability to bring instant peace, "I saw something else too. Something beautiful and wonderful that made my heart feel like it was full of sunshine." "What do you mean?" he whispered. Emma's voice dropped to an excited whisper, as if she were sharing the most precious secret in the universe. "I saw what you're supposed to become, what God has been preparing you for your whole life. I saw you helping hundreds and hundreds of children who don't have mommies and daddies anymore. I saw you building beautiful places where they could live and learn and feel safe and loved. I saw you becoming the kind of person who changes the whole world one broken heart at a time." Harrison felt tears welling up again, the now familiar sensation of his carefully constructed emotional walls crumbling under the gentle assault of this impossible child's faith in him. "Emma, I don't know how to be that person anymore. I don't even remember how to care about anything except profit margins and market shares." "Yes, you do," she said, with the absolute certainty of divine revelation. "You just forgot for a while because the hurt was so big it covered up everything else. But forgetting isn't forever, Mr. Sterling. Hearts can remember how to love again, even when they've been broken into a million pieces." She stood up and brushed the dust off her little dress with unconscious dignity. "Mr. Sterling, Grandma Betty and I are going to help you remember who you really are inside. But first, there's something very important I need to tell you. Something scary but necessary about why God sent me to find you." Harrison's heart began racing with sudden, inexplicable dread. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma's expression grew grave, her childish features taking on an otherworldly solemnity that made her look ancient despite her 7 years. "Grandma Betty is much sicker than she's been telling you. The doctors at the free clinic said she doesn't have very long to live, maybe a few months, maybe less, and when she goes to heaven to be with Mama and Papa." Emma's voice broke slightly, revealing the frightened little girl beneath the mystical exterior. "I won't have anyone left in the whole world." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow to the solar plexus, stealing his breath and making his vision blur with sudden, overwhelming emotion. "Emma, no. There has to be something we can do, some treatment. But that's not even the scary part, Mr. "Sterling!" Emma interrupted, her blue eyes filling with tears that made Harrison's heart feel like it was being crushed in a vice. "The scary part is what happens to children like me when they don't have any family left. They disappear into a system that breaks their spirits and steals their gifts. And if that happens to me, She looked up at him with desperate hope shining through her tears. I'll never be able to help the people God shows me in my dreams. All the good I'm supposed to do in the world will just disappear forever. Harrison Sterling stared down at this impossible, miraculous child who had somehow become the most important person in his world, and realized with crystal clarity that Emma hadn't stumbled into his life by accident to be saved. She had been sent by forces beyond his understanding to save him, and now it was his turn to save her. Harrison didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights that had once represented his kingdom, his empire of steel and ambition. But now all he could see were the thousands of windows hiding thousands of broken hearts, thousands of people who needed hope and found only darkness. At dawn, he made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. "I want to adopt Emma," Harrison announced to Betty the next morning, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. They were sitting in the church's tiny kitchen, sharing coffee from chipped mugs, while Emma fed stale bread to pigeons outside the window. Betty set down her cup carefully, studying his face with those penetrating blue eyes. "Mr. Sterling, adoption isn't like buying a company. You can't just write a check and take home a little girl." "I know that," Harrison said, though he was beginning to realize he knew almost nothing about the complexities of becoming a father. "But I have resources, lawyers, connections. Surely there's a way to expedite the process given Emma's unique circumstances." "And what happens when you get bored?" Betty asked quietly. "What happens when the novelty of playing father wears off, and you remember you're a billionaire bachelor who's never changed a diaper, or helped with homework, or dealt with a sick child at 3 in the morning? The question stung because it touched his deepest fear. "I won't abandon her, Mrs. Thompson. I give you my word." "Words are easy, Mr. Sterling. Love is hard work every single day, even when you're tired and frustrated and wish you were anywhere else in the world." Emma appeared in the doorway, her small face serious. "Grandma Betty, he means it. I can see it in his heart. It's not black and twisted anymore. It's getting brighter every day, like someone's lighting candles inside him." Betty looked from her granddaughter to Harrison and back again. "Child, are you certain this is what God wants? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. Mr. Sterling will legally become your father, responsible for your soul as well as your body." Emma nodded solemnly. "God showed me last night. He said Mr. Sterling isn't just supposed to save me. I'm supposed to help him save lots of other children too. We're going to be partners in God's work." Harrison felt the weight of divine destiny settling on his shoulders like a mantle he wasn't sure he deserved to wear. "Mrs. Thompson, I know I'm not the obvious choice for fatherhood, but I swear to you on Sarah's memory that I will love Emma and protect her with my life." Betty was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug like it was an anchor in a storm. Finally, she spoke. "There are conditions, Mr. Sterling. Non-negotiable conditions. Name them." "First, Emma continues her education here at St. Mary's Elementary. She needs stability, not some fancy private school where she'll be treated like a curiosity." "Agreed. Second, we don't hide what she is. If God gave her this gift, then it's meant to be used to help people, not locked away in some ivory tower." Harrison nodded, though the thought of exposing Emma to the world's scrutiny made his protective instincts roar. "And third," Betty's voice grew soft, "when my time comes, you let Emma say goodbye properly. No protecting her from death, no lies about where I've gone. She's already lost too much. She deserves the truth, even when it hurts." Harrison's throat closed up. "Mrs. Thompson, do you agree to my conditions?" He looked at Emma, who was watching him with those impossibly wise eyes, and realized that saving this child might be the first truly important thing he'd ever done in his life. "I agree to everything." 3 weeks later, Harrison discovered that good intentions meant nothing in the labyrinthine world of family court. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, said Margaret Hutchinson, the social worker assigned to Emma's case. She was a stern woman in her 50s, with steel-grey hair and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many children failed by the system. But your application presents several red flags that we simply cannot ignore. They were sitting in a sterile government office that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Harrison had brought his best lawyer, but legal expertise seemed useless against bureaucratic immovability. Red flags? Harrison's voice was carefully controlled, though inside he was screaming with frustration. I'm offering this child a stable home, unlimited resources, the best education money can buy. You're a 32-year-old bachelor who has never married, never had children, and works 80-hour weeks. Miss Hutchinson interrupted. Your lifestyle is completely incompatible with child-rearing. Furthermore, there are concerns about your motivations. What's that supposed to mean? Ms. Hutchinson consulted her file with the precision of a judge reading a death sentence. Several people have suggested that you're using this adoption as a publicity stunt, a way to soften your corporate image. One anonymous source claimed you called the child your pet project. Harrison's blood turned to ice. That's a lie. Who said that? I cannot reveal my sources, Mr. Sterling. What I can tell you is that the state of New York takes a very dim view of wealthy individuals who treat adoption like charity work. This isn't charity, Harrison said desperately. Emma is. She's become the most important person in my world. I would die before I'd let anything happen to her. That's very touching, Mr. Sterling, but emotional declarations don't override practical concerns. The fact remains that you are fundamentally unprepared to raise a child, particularly one with Emma's unusual circumstances. Harrison's lawyer leaned forward. Ms. Hutchinson, my client is worth $3 billion. He can provide for this child in ways that most families could never. Money isn't love, Mr. Daniels. Ms. Hutchinson said sharply, and love isn't something you can buy, no matter how many zeros are in your bank account. That afternoon, Harrison sat on a park bench across from the church, watching Emma play with a group of neighborhood children. She moved among them like a tiny angel, somehow knowing exactly what each child needed, a gentle word for the shy ones, patient inclusion for the outcasts, fierce protection for the vulnerable. Betty settled beside him, her breathing more labored than it had been even a week ago. She told me about the meeting. They're going to put her in foster care when you... Harrison couldn't finish the sentence. When I die, Betty said matter-of-factly. Yes, I know. The system doesn't understand children like Emma. They'll drug her to stop the dreams, lock her away in institutions, convince her that her gift is mental illness. Harrison turned to look at this dying woman who had become his unlikely ally. Then what do we do? Betty smiled sadly. We pray, Mr. Sterling, and we trust that God didn't bring you into Emma's life just to watch you fail. But as Harrison watched Emma laugh with the other children, her blonde hair shining in the afternoon sun, he couldn't shake the feeling that prayer might not be enough to overcome the cold machinery of bureaucracy. Time was running out, and the system seemed determined to tear apart the fragile family they'd begun to build. That evening, Emma found Harrison sitting alone in the church, staring at the simple wooden cross that hung above the altar. The sanctuary was empty, except for the dancing shadows cast by flickering votive candles, creating an atmosphere of peaceful solitude that seemed to invite confession and contemplation. You're sad about the lady who doesn't want you to be my daddy, Emma said, settling beside him in the front pew with the intuitive understanding that had become as natural as breathing between them. Ms. Hutchinson is just doing her job, Harrison replied, though his voice carried the bitter edge of defeat. She's trying to protect you from someone who might not be worthy of being your father. Emma was quiet for a moment, her small hands folded in her lap like a miniature prayer. When she spoke, Her voice held that otherworldly quality that meant she was seeing beyond the present moment. "Mr. Sterling, do you want to know what Sarah thinks about all this?" Harrison's breath caught in his throat. Over the past month, Emma had mentioned his sister several times, but always in passing, always as gentle reassurance rather than detailed conversation. "What does she say?" "She says you were the best big brother in the whole world, even when you made mistakes. She says you taught her how to ride her bicycle, how to tie her shoes, how to make wishes on dandelions. She says you used to read her stories every night before bed, doing funny voices for all the characters until she laughed so hard she got hiccups." A duel. Tears began streaming down Harrison's face as memories he'd buried for 25 years came flooding back. He had forgotten those precious moments, lost them beneath layers of guilt and self-recrimination. "She also says," Emma continued softly, "that you're going to be the most wonderful daddy because you know what it feels like to lose someone you love. You'll never take me for granted the way some parents do with their children." "Emma, I'm scared," Harrison admitted, his voice breaking like a dam finally giving way. "I'm terrified that I'll fail you, that I'll make the same mistakes I made with Sarah, that I'll lose you too, and it will destroy what's left of my soul." Emma reached over and took his hand, and as always, that magical peace flowed through him like warm honey. "Mr. Sterling, do you know why God gave me dreams about you for so long before I sent that letter? Why? Because He needed me to see all of you. Not just the sad, angry man you became, but the loving little boy you used to be. He showed me how you cried when your goldfish died, how you gave your lunch money to a classmate whose family couldn't afford food, how you once stood up to older boys who were bullying a kid with glasses." Harrison stared at this impossible child who somehow knew the deepest truths of his heart. "I'd forgotten all of that. People forget the good things about themselves when they're carrying too much pain," Emma said, with the wisdom of someone far beyond her 7 years. "But God doesn't forget. He's been waiting 25 years for you to remember who you really are inside." She stood up and smoothed her little dress, then looked back at him with eyes that seemed to hold all the love in the universe. "Mr. Sterling, the lady at the courthouse is wrong about you. You're not unprepared to be my daddy. You're the only person in the whole world who was made to be my daddy. God showed me that in my very first dream about you." As Emma walked toward the altar to light a candle for her parents, Harrison Sterling sat in the quiet sanctuary and felt something miraculous happening inside his chest. For the first time in 25 years, he was beginning to forgive himself. And in that forgiveness, he found the strength to fight for the little girl who had saved his soul. The call came at 3 a.m, shrill and insistent in the darkness of Harrison's penthouse. He fumbled for the phone, his heart already racing with the premonition that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse again. "Mr. Sterling." The voice was young, nervous, one of the hospital volunteers from St. Mary's Medical Center. "You need to come quickly, Mrs. Thompson. She collapsed during evening prayers. Emma's with her, but she's asking for you." Harrison threw on clothes and drove through empty streets at dangerous speeds, his hands shaking on the steering wheel as he navigated the maze of New York's late-night landscape. The hospital's fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving, making everything look pale and lifeless. He found Emma curled up in a chair beside Betty's bed, looking impossibly small and fragile in the sterile ICU environment. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring vital signs that Harrison didn't want to understand. "How is she?" he whispered, kneeling beside Emma's chair. "Grandma Betty's going to heaven soon," Emma said matter-of-factly, though her voice carried the tremor of a frightened child trying to be brave. "She wanted to wait for you so she could tell you something important." Betty's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Harrison with effort. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried the weight of absolute truth. "Mr. Sterling, there's something about Emma, something I should have told you weeks ago." Harrison leaned closer, his heart pounding with sudden dread. "Emma isn't just gifted," Betty continued, each word a struggle. "She's the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, born under a blood moon on Christmas Eve. In our family, children like Emma only come once in a generation. They're chosen by God for a special purpose." "What kind of purpose?" Harrison asked, though part of him feared the answer. Betty's eyes moved to Emma, who was holding her grandmother's hand with quiet dignity. "Tell him, child, tell him what you've never told anyone else." Emma looked up at Harrison with eyes that suddenly seemed ancient, far older than her 7 years. "Mr. Sterling, I don't just see people's past hurts in my dreams. I see their futures too. I see what will happen if they choose love instead of fear, hope instead of despair." Harrison's mouth went dry. "What have you seen about me?" "I've seen you saving thousands of children over the next 30 years. I've seen you building schools and hospitals and homes for kids who have no one else. I've seen you becoming one of the most important people in the world, not because of your money, but because of your heart." Betty squeezed Emma's hand with her last reserves of strength. "But I've also seen the other path, Mr. Sterling. The one where you let fear win, where you walk away from Emma to protect yourself from getting hurt again." "And what happens on that path?" Harrison whispered. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You die alone and bitter, having never learned to love again. And I spend my life in institutions, my gifts wasted, unable to help the people God sends me to save." The machines began beeping more urgently as Betty's breathing became shallow. With tremendous effort, she reached for Harrison's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. "Promise me," she gasped. "Promise me you won't let fear steal Emma's destiny. She chose you, Mr. Sterling, not the other way around. She chose you because she saw what you could become." Harrison looked from Betty to Emma and back again, understanding for the first time the true magnitude of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about adopting one special child. This was about accepting a divine calling that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his purpose in life. "I promise," he whispered, as Betty Thompson smiled one last time and closed her eyes forever. And in that hospital room, as Emma grieved the loss of her last blood relative, Harrison Sterling finally understood that some promises are so sacred they change the very fabric of your soul. Betty's funeral was held on a grey October morning that seemed to mourn along with the small gathering of people whose lives she had touched. Harrison stood beside Emma at the graveside, his hand protective on her small shoulder as she said goodbye to the woman who had been her anchor in a stormy world. "She's with Mama and Papa now," Emma whispered as they lowered the simple wooden casket into the earth. "She says to tell you not to be sad because her job here was finished. She was just supposed to take care of me until you were ready to love again." But Harrison's grief for Betty was overshadowed by a more immediate crisis. The next morning, Margaret Hutchinson arrived at the church with 2 police officers and a court order. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," she said, though her tone suggested she felt no such regret, "but Emma Thompson is now a ward of the state. She'll be placed in temporary foster care while we conduct a thorough investigation into suitable, permanent arrangements." "No!" Harrison stepped between the social worker and Emma, his entire body vibrating with protective fury. "I have lawyers, I have resources, I have—" "You have money, Mr. Sterling. What you don't have is legal standing. The court has determined that your application is unsuitable, and frankly, some very disturbing information has come to light about your relationship with this child." Harrison's blood turned to ice. "What information?" Ms. Hutchinson consulted her clipboard with bureaucratic satisfaction. Multiple witnesses have reported that Emma Thompson claims to receive supernatural communications, that you've been encouraging these delusions, and that you may be exploiting her alleged psychic abilities for financial gain. That's insane, Harrison protested. But even as he spoke, he realized how their situation must look to outsiders. A billionaire businessman suddenly interested in a homeless child who claimed to talk to angels. Emma stepped forward, her small hand slipping into Harrison's with complete trust. "Ms. Hutchinson, I know you're trying to protect me, but you don't understand. Mr. Sterling is supposed to be my daddy. God showed me in my dreams years before I ever met him." The social worker's expression hardened. "Sweetheart, there's no such thing as prophetic dreams. What you're experiencing is likely trauma-related psychological disturbance that requires professional treatment." "I'm not crazy," Emma said quietly, but with absolute conviction. "And neither is Mr. Sterling. We're just two broken people who found each other because God knew we needed each other to be whole." One of the police officers stepped forward apologetically. "Ma'am, we really need to go. The Foster family is expecting her this afternoon." Harrison felt his world tilting on its axis as they reached for Emma. This couldn't be happening. He couldn't lose another child he loved to forces beyond his control. "Wait," Emma said, her voice carrying sudden authority that made everyone freeze. She looked up at Ms. Hutchinson with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Ms. Hutchinson, you lost your own daughter in a car accident 12 years ago. Her name was Rebecca, and she was 8 years old, just 1 year older than me." The social worker's clipboard clattered to the floor. "How could you possibly? You blame yourself because you were working late that night instead of picking her up from ballet class. You've spent 12 years trying to save other children because you couldn't save Rebecca." Emma's voice was gentle but relentless. "But Rebecca doesn't blame you, Ms. Hutchinson. She's been trying to tell you that for years, but you won't listen because the guilt is too loud in your head." Margaret Hutchinson was crying now, tears streaming down her face as 25 years of buried grief broke free. "That's impossible. You can't know these things." Emma stepped closer, her small hand reaching out to touch the woman who'd come to tear her away from the only family she had left. "Rebecca says to tell you that the butterfly garden you planted in her memory is beautiful, and she especially loves the purple flowers because they were always her favorite color." The social worker collapsed into a nearby pew, her professional composure shattered by the impossible accuracy of Emma's revelations. Harrison knelt beside Emma, finally understanding the true power of this miraculous child who'd been placed in his care. "Ms. Hutchinson," Harrison said gently, "what if I told you that Emma isn't the one who needs saving? What if she's the one who's been sent to save all of us?" And in that moment, Margaret Hutchinson looked at Emma Thompson with new eyes and saw not a damaged child who needed protection from delusion, but a messenger of hope who carried healing in her tiny hands. The war for Emma's future had taken an unexpected turn, and for the first time since Betty's death, Harrison dared to hope they might actually win. 6 months later, Harrison Sterling stood in the marble lobby of the newly opened Sterling Foundation Children's Center, watching Emma put the finishing touches on a mural she'd painted with the help of a dozen formerly homeless kids. The building had once housed his coldest, most profitable venture capital firm. Now it was home to children who had nowhere else to go. "Daddy, come see!" Emma called out, her voice echoing through the space that had been transformed from sterile corporate efficiency into warm, welcoming sanctuary. She was wearing paint-splattered overalls and had a streak of blue across her cheek, looking exactly like the carefree 7-year-old she should have always been allowed to be. The word "daddy" still made Harrison's heart skip a beat. The adoption had been finalized 3 months ago after Margaret Hutchinson became Emma's most passionate advocate. The social worker now worked directly for the Sterling Foundation, using her bureaucratic expertise to cut through red tape and reunite families torn apart by the system she'd once served blindly. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Harrison said, studying the mural that depicted children of all colors and backgrounds holding hands beneath a brilliant rainbow. But it was the figure in the corner that made his breath catch, a small blonde girl with wings, watching over all the others with protective love. "That's Sarah," Emma said matter-of-factly, cleaning her paintbrush with careful precision. "She wanted to be part of our new family too." Harrison knelt beside his daughter, still marveling at the legal and emotional reality of that relationship, and pulled her into a gentle hug that smelled of paint and possibilities. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have asked you months ago." Emma tilted her head with that familiar gesture that meant she was listening with more than just her ears. "What is it, Daddy?" "Why me?" Harrison asked, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Out of all the people in the world, all the families who could have loved you, why did God show you my face in those dreams? Why was I the one chosen to be your father?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her blue eyes growing distant as if she was seeing something invisible to everyone else in the room. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of divine revelation. "Daddy, do you remember what I told you about being the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter? About how children like me only come once in a generation?" Harrison nodded, his heart beginning to race with inexplicable anticipation. "Well, there's something else Grandma Betty never got to tell you before she went to heaven," Emma continued, her small hand finding his with that magical ability to bring instant peace. "Children like me aren't born randomly. We're sent to specific people at specific times for specific purposes." "What do you mean?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady with absolute conviction. "Daddy, 25 years ago when Sarah died, she made a deal with God. She asked him to send an angel to take care of you when you needed it most, to help you remember how to love and be loved." Harrison's world tilted on its axis as understanding dawned like sunrise, breaking through storm clouds. "Emma, are you saying that Sarah asked God to let her come back," Emma whispered, her words barely audible above the distant sounds of children playing in other rooms. "Not in the same body, not with the same face, but with the same heart, the same love, the same purpose of taking care of her big brother." Tears streamed down Harrison's face as 25 years of grief and guilt and desperate longing crystallized into perfect, impossible clarity. "You're telling me that I'm not Sarah," Emma said gently, "but I'm the answer to her prayer. I'm the angel she asked God to send you. I'm the little sister who would never leave you again, who would help you save all the children who need saving, who would love you exactly the way Sarah always did." Harrison collapsed onto the floor, his entire body shaking with the magnitude of divine grace that had orchestrated this miraculous reunion. Everything made perfect sense now, Emma's impossible knowledge about his childhood, her instinctive understanding of his deepest wounds, the way she'd appeared in his life at the exact moment when his heart was ready to love again. "So you see, Daddy," Emma continued, settling beside him on the floor with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged exactly where she was. "You didn't save me from being alone in the world. God used me to save you from being alone forever. We were always supposed to be a family. It just took 25 years for you to be ready to receive the gift Sarah wanted to give you." Around them, the children's center buzzed with life and laughter and hope. 17 kids now called this place home, with dozens more receiving daily support, education, and love. Harrison's billions were finally being used for their highest purpose, transforming lives instead of merely accumulating wealth. "And this is just the beginning," Emma said, her voice carrying prophetic certainty as she gestured toward the mural and the children and the bright future spreading out before them like an endless horizon. "God showed me what we're going to build together, Daddy. Hundreds of centers like this one, thousands of children saved, millions of lives touched by the love Sarah planted in your heart all those years ago. Harrison Sterling looked at his miracle daughter, the answer to a prayer he'd never known how to pray, the healing of a wound he'd thought would never stop bleeding, and understood that some stories are so magnificent they can only be written by angels. "I love you, Emma Rose," he whispered, holding her close as the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows like a benediction. "I love you too, Daddy," she whispered back. "Sarah says she's so proud of the man you've become, and she can't wait to see all the beautiful things we're going to do together." Dottie, and in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of rescued children in a building transformed from greed into grace, Harrison Sterling finally came home to the family he was always meant to have. The little girl's letter had been right. It really had changed his life forever, but the greatest miracle wasn't that Emma had found him. The greatest miracle was that love, once lost, could always find its way home again.